Hello, everyone. I'm Lou Zaccarella, one of the founders of the Intelligent Community Forum. Welcome to No Place But Home, conversations with leaders around the world about the place we call home. This episode is underwritten by ICF Canada. As we discussed last time in our Did God Stay Home episode, we can measure the rise and fall of a market index, but who's tracking the social index in a place, in a community during a time of disease, financial collapse, and social uprisings? Well, I think my next three guests are. And if I know them as I think I do, each will say that it's an opportunity to leverage the chaos, introduce innovation, and come out with something that we're all passionate about here, a better community, because, well, they've all found ways to do it. So we're going to bring them here today and ask them to share those processes and thoughts with you. So what is their form of innovation? Their process for introducing what one of our guests calls micro innovations. Let's find out. The first guest is Professor Mel Horwitz. Professor Horwitz speaks and writes extensively on global innovation and modern entrepreneurship. Most recently, he was Dean of Central European University Business School in Budapest, where he directed the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Project. We actually met when he served as chair of the Department of Technology Management and Innovation at the Polytechnic Institute at New York University here in New York, where he also founded the AFMER Institute and led the institute in some groundbreaking work for technology and enterprise. He's a Princeton graduate, and Professor Horwitz received his MBA and doctorate from Harvard Business School. He has been a distinguished visiting scholar at the London School of Business and other prestigious institutions around the globe. He also was the person who said to the Intelligent Community Forum, come over here to NYU and you can produce your conference. And if he hadn't done that, I don't know where we'd be today. Early in his life, he served as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer in Asia, and it's just a great pleasure to see him today. Welcome, Mel.
Thank you, Lou. I didn't charge you enough when you came over to Poly.
Okay. Clayton Banks is the CEO of Silicon Harlem and a pioneer in the communications industry. Through Silicon Harlem, he has transformed that community and has helped inspire other urban markets and thinkers to become similarly minded and for those places to become innovation and tech hubs. Silicon Harlem has partnered with the City of New York to establish a STEM-based startup accelerator, has guided the discussion for robust wireless broadband to support social development and startups, and it guides a virtual startup incubator for tech-based entrepreneurs. And I'm just getting started with what they do. Silicon Harlem produces the only tech conference in Harlem focused on next generation internet and its impact on economic development. Sound familiar? And they were hosts of the 2017 ICF Smart 21 conference. Clayton, welcome. Good to see you today.
It's certainly good to be seen in this era. But most importantly, it's really good to see you, Lou. You've been a real true spirit in this world, and certainly in this challenging time. And I was happy that you mentioned a couple of highlights, but at some point we'll talk about the 25 highlights I get to share with you.
Oh, very good. So we've got 22 left. Great to see you. And again, thanks for coming by. Nick Smoot is turning cities into inclusive incubators. Nick is the CEO of the Innovation Collective, an organization you're going to be hearing more about. His group has been running an experiment to repair community and capitalism. The collective is in 11 communities today with their form of local micro-innovation, which I find fascinating. Many of them are in unlikely places, and yet they are producing significant numbers of startups and more. And again, if you see similarities in the Intelligent Community Forum movement, they're there because he goes to places that we call the non-marquee communities, and he transforms them. Nick is a Milken Institute Young Leader and was a member of the Young Entrepreneur Council. You may have seen or read about him on Bloomberg, USA Today, Fast Company, or maybe heard him at South by Southwest. in the days when you could actually travel to Austin and they actually had that conference. And he's here with us today, and I couldn't be delighted. I think you guys are doing great work, and welcome, Nick.
Thank you. It's honestly an honor to be a part of this, and for me to get to meet Mel and Clayton, and you and I had a great conversation the other day, and it's nice to see faces and meet new friends that are hopefully what I already believe, because they know you, are co-conspirators of good. So it should be a good time.
Absolutely. And I actually still get a thrill when I see those two guys, and I've known them for about 100 years. So it never gets old. Well, you know, Nick, I'm going to start the questioning, with you, because you're our new guy here. You said somewhere, and I'm not sure where, but you said that the wheels of capitalism are a bit wobbly due to pressures we didn't expect. The internet, you said, I think, is a prime example. Well, there are a lot of other things that have come up that we didn't expect, right? Over the last 140 days or so, and we've been talking about them here. I'll start with you, and then I'll turn it over to the other gentleman. What are the primary problems that you think were exposed during the COVID outbreak, and of course the resultant economic collapse? And how can innovation play a role in the recovery of our social index, which has kind of gone down with it or gone up, depending on how you look at it?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think it's a great one, because I've heard a lot of people say, I can't wait to get back to normal. And I keep reminding people there is no normal, there's only forward. And when we look at the pandemic, it's an accelerant. And I think one of the things that it exposed very, very quickly and very brightly was the inability for individuals to really withstand a storm. Our federal government had to swoop in immediately. It's really mixed up the capital labor markets to where some people are really struggling to get back to work or get their employees back because they're getting extra money now for staying at home. And when you watch that mixed in with there's no money in their savings account, mixed in with they're lonely, and now people are hundreds of days into this and feeling this weird pressure. We're starting to see some of the societal issues around scenarios with concern around child abuse, suicide rates, depression. I think this pandemic has exacerbated things we knew, that people didn't have savings, and we knew people were lonely, and we knew that even though their routines were maybe garbage, they were routines, but it just pulled the routines away completely and left them with what they already had in their quote unquote savings account, financial and emotional, and we're bankrupt, hard stop. And I think, to me, that's what it's shown a massive light on. Do I think that some families are building back to something meaningful? I do. But I think those are the biggest things that it's shown a light on.
Right. So when you said that the wheels of capitalism were a bit wobbly, those things were all going on, and this thing just kind of maybe took at least the back wheels off it for a while. Is that about right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think automation, robotics, we're watching people try and implement new things as well very quickly. I don't think we plan on, we definitely didn't plan on airplanes or shipping, globalization, the internet, and we definitely weren't planning on burger flipping robots at White Castle or Starship Technologies delivering little robots that can, take food to people's houses. Does it make it better in the pandemic? Yes, but I think it has ripped the wheels off even more, to where we're looking for how do we systematize the machine of capitalism and keep the money flowing. And it feels like human labor market is a secondary issue to the capital market.
Interesting. Clay, I'm going to turn that one over to you, because it's a nice segue. One of the things that we learned in New York was that even though you're the epicenter, you can get through it by being smart, by being intelligent, but also that communities that had, quote, essential workers were very, very hard hit, communities probably like yours. and that the people in our communities that we didn't always look at sort of became those that we depended on. But what it said was that we just weren't looking at our labor market in the way that sort of Nick is suggesting here. When you look back now at about 140 days after, our city did a good job bending that curve, what do you think the primary problems were that got exposed, and did it surprise you?
Well, thank you for the question. I'm going to try to build a little bit on what Nick, sort of expressed, and build on it in a way of trying to put a face to it. We can talk in academic, language, but we really want to put people at the center of this. And I think Nick put a real good frame for me to do that. Let me give one example. Last week, I was putting together an orientation of, I'm sorry, somebody was visiting me. But anyway, I'm taking 75 kids on this summer, training them how to code and basically work within entrepreneurialism and micro innovations and all these type of things. Because when COVID hit, it had a big impact on what was going to happen this summer in terms of summer programs and all this other stuff was at risk. So we immediately went into a rapid response to deal with that. Basically, we wanted to do an orientation last week to prepare for this week in which we actually launched the class. So I asked my team to get all the students together in their various cohorts and do orientations just to get them ready. And we found 3 kids that did not attend the orientation, and I was very concerned about that. So I asked my team, Bruce and everybody else, please find out why those kids were not on that orientation. I'm so happy everybody's sitting down. The kids reported back finally to us saying we had no electricity. Do you understand what I'm saying? They had no electricity in New York City, in the United States, for a day and a half. So when we talk about what the pandemic has done, hasn't done anything to those people except let the rest of us know what's going on. That has happened in their lives prior to the pandemic. And here's the interesting thing about it. It wasn't they didn't pay their bill. The building went out. The infrastructure went out. A dilapidated building that could not provide electricity for a day and a half. So let's put real people to this, because I think the term of 2020 when it comes to the vulnerable is called social determinants. But these social determinants have lasted way too long. I did a meetup inside of a public housing a year ago, and I was so pumped to do it. My team was sort of like, man, maybe we don't really want to do it there because, it could be sometimes dangerous, or, maybe the infrastructure is not going to hold up. And I had them go do a site visit. And sure enough, the room we were going to do the meetup in, I'm sorry, Lou, I have to tell this.
Sure.
But the roof was leaking. Okay. So, we'll try to get it fixed before you guys come. My team is telling me, let's just do it in our office. Why would we do that? I said, no, we're going to do it there, even if the ceiling is leaking. We get there the night of the meetup, and sure enough, the leak was still there. We had several, if not 100 people come down and into this meetup, and there's a leaky roof. If you look at a leaky roof, that means there's leaky pipes in the building. If there's leaky pipes in the building, that means there's mold. If there's mold in the building, that means respiratory issues. If there's respiratory issues when there's coronavirus, you die. That particular building has had more people who go into Harlem Hospital and die than just about any other one location. These are called self-determinants, where there's no healthy food in your several blocks. When the neighborhood isn't lit up in a way that makes it safe. These are the things, Lou, that's at the core of what intelligent Community Forum is all about, which is how do we address these issues from a people perspective?
Right.
If I was to create one simple way to get at all of this, if I was to suggest one simple way to the wobbly capitalism that's been sort of expressed, is, damn, why don't we just give everybody the internet? Why don't we give everybody the internet, right? Because 40 to 50% of people living in public housing do not have an internet connection in their home.
Right.
A
And
social determinant about managing your health. Most of these people die and couldn't get to a doctor.
Or have telemedicine, right?
Telemedicine, telehealth.
No electricity.
I mean, what
no
is the
internet.
matter with us? These young people being closed out of school, losing that social interaction, but don't have the infrastructure to stay in touch with their teachers.
Yep.
So there's no surprise why they're running the streets right now when you're hearing an uptick of violence and all this other stuff. We have to really focus in on the social determinants, specifically in certain vulnerable populations, because this goes all the way up to seniors and down. And that way we get the wheels back on the right track, which is caring about people.
And so what we're going to do, Clay, is circle back on what types of innovation can be introduced behind the internet. Because again, you've been fighting for robust internet connectivity through the Silicon Harlem organization for a long time. And, you know, maybe people listen harder now. So we'll circle back on that, and also on the issue that Nick talks about a lot, which is trying to reactivate confidence in a place, which seems almost impossible today, given how many communities have been beaten down. Mel, I'm going to switch to you.
Let me quickly give you a statistic, though, Lou. In 100 days, 25,000 people have died in New York City.
Right.
Just swallow that up a little bit. Within the last 100 days, 25,000 people have died.
That's right. Mel, you know, your perspective is useful here also because you've spent time, you know, overseas. You know, you obviously you worked in Hungary. You've traveled a bit. You've been outside of the urban corridors, but you've still been thinking about this. When this all went down, what do you think was exposed? What did you say? You know, I knew that was going to be a part of this.
Well, first of all, Lou, thank you again for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to be with all these panelists. They're doing something and I'm thinking about it. So I'm sort of in awe of what they're doing. And it's also really fun and exciting to be part of an ICF initiative again. So I was thinking about what I could say, particularly after what I just heard from Nick and Clay. And it brought me back to something one of my sons asked me after we were looking at the news and viewing what is happening. He said, "Dad, how come you teach all these MBAs, you go around the world, you know all these things about advanced management and innovation, and how come we're not smart? I mean, how come we're not smart?" You know, he was sort of accusing me of being a failure, but he said, "How come we're not smart?" And you know, I felt kind of guilty, and so I started to think about that.
Don't, Mel, don't.
Maybe I could share why we're not smart. And first of all, I think all the ingredients are not there. One of the interesting things about ICF and the kind of methodology that you have developed over the years, as I've said before, is that it has a lot of variety to it. And I think that there are oases of places, such as some of the communities you've identified, of being smart. And I think being smart, one thing, this country has not been smart. And we have the example of New York City, was just mentioned. We are not smart, whereas other societies are smart. My son, for example, has spent the last 5 months in Taiwan. And Taiwan may be the stellar success story in the world dealing with the COVID virus. And I've sort of thought about what are the ingredients of being smart and what can we do? And, you know, for example, I think we do need technology. You can't deal with the complexities of a situation like COVID or anything else without advanced technology, without analytics, without internet, without broadband and so on. But we also need more what I would call training and professionalism. I was just in Nigeria, well, not just, maybe 6-7 months ago, and trying to help introduce new kinds of management methods for entrepreneurship. And there's a craving for professionalism. And we just don't have that here. We don't have enough good education at almost all levels. But even at the level that I deal with management education, it needs to be more pervasive. And one thing that we find, both in communities in the States and around the world, is we don't give them best in class. We give what I call derivative education, old books, not new thinking, old research, not new thinking. One of the things I tried to do in Hungary is get rid of all these old textbooks and start using advanced material because the students really required it. And I'm sure this is true in New York City, not just at my level. And then we can go on and we can talk about the need to be innovative in existing organizations, large organizations, as well as being entrepreneurial in both the private sector, public sector, and not-for-profit. And we could go on and we could talk about the need to scale, and particularly the need for leadership and the need for variety and diversity in our organizations. And I think also the need to understand that the real resource today in an economy that's increasingly knowledge intensive, and I'm not even talking just about the US, I'm talking about Africa, Central Eastern Europe, is human talent. There's such a waste of human talent.
Yeah.
And each person who exists has a brain, and we had to mobilize these brains. And one of the things that my son made very clear to me about Taiwan is that the people in Taiwan trust their government. They're willing to sort of sacrifice a little bit in terms of contract tracing, geo-positioning, because they trust the government. And then there's learning. And finally, I'll just make one more point. And that is, we often talk about smart cities as if it's just technological, as if it's 5G and so on. And IBM and others emphasize that, the tech companies emphasize that. But in addition, we need to go back and get more leadership, more general management, what I would call general management skills, the idea of integrating an organization or community. It's sort of old-fashioned, but we need to go back and regain some of those enduring managerial qualities, even moral qualities, even commitment to different stakeholders, as we bring in more of these advanced capabilities that we now have. And I think very few societies, cities, communities have brought together this kind of recipe, this kind of blend together. And the ones that have, you in particular and others, but you have identified. And what's interesting about it is that they are rare. They are rare. And this country, I think, has shown that we have fallen down so far in implementing this blend, this recipe. And we're sort of seeing the results. And I think it's interesting. We have still time, but we have to put together that recipe that will really bring smart, intelligent societies and communities to the fore to deal with this and other problems.
Yeah, that's well said, Mel. And I want to circle back on what we can do process-wise to identify techniques and methods that do work and can be implemented anywhere. And I also want to get at what Clay was saying, because if you break it all down and unpack it, he was saying that social determinants need to be addressed if a community has any chance at all. Nick, I'm going to go back to you on this. You guys spend a lot of time going into communities and looking for ways to introduce sort of the acupuncture of innovation. You really get down on the ground and, you know, look around to see what a place is, where the, again, to use Clay's words as well, social determinants, you know, are corrosive. Tell us a little bit about the Innovation Collective's technique and how they might be able to introduce social innovation and give a community confidence, especially one that has been beaten down.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I have to touch on something Mel said, that we held a think tank with a lot of the smart city leaders this last summer. And one of the things that came out of it was smart cities, smart citizens, and people starting to acknowledge the fact that if we just have faster internet and better infrastructure and better data without better engagement techniques for activating the dormant human capital and the potential in the people, we end up with great infrastructure and smart cities, dumb people. And you know, I think you said that very well, and I think it's high time that the smart cities conversation starts to look at the magic of humans, which is kind of a segue into some of our work. You know, our methodology, if it's the full, you know, run of the system, starts with a municipality or a community, a philanthropy, a college, someone engaging us, and we live in the city for two weeks. First, we come in with a team of 2. We spend 7 days there. We leave for 3 weeks, come back, do it again. 2 separate teams. We synthesize a lot of information. We have a little over 200 person-to-person meetings. Some of it's with the traditional stakeholders, but then it's also, we have a budget to go out to bars and we buy drinks for people. We don't drink while we're there. Our team does not, but we go out and we buy drinks and we listen. We spend time at restaurants, coffee shops, the refugee centers, anywhere we can kind of get ourselves into. And we make friends and we walk around neighborhoods and we ask if we can sit with people. And we're creating a map of what's really going on under the hood that a lot of people have been missing. We look at the economic data, but we also get this very clear feedback of buzzwords that are said about the community from the community, their own sense of identity and who they believe they are. We also look online at what does the rest of the world say about this community, what kind of comments are out there, what urban dictionary definitions are there for the town, which is a fun one to show to government officials who ask what's urban dictionary. But that becomes a template for us to show them, here's where we are, and here's a prescriptive look at how you would build a very grassroots inclusive economy, which gets into our methodology. And we spend the first segment of about a 3-year seed process that at the end of 3 years, it's this self-perpetuating engine of upward mobility with kind of integrated funding from sponsors, corporates, real estate, and local people paying in. But what they're paying in for, the method is, we create a community of curiosity and a community of confidence through this process. First, it's the community of curiosity. We do these storytelling nights once a month where we tell stories of local people who have succeeded and failed and created something of value and beauty. And we look for the folks that are often overlooked, never written about in the newspapers. We also do a thing called Coffee and Concepts. And that looks at what ideas do people have that are going on in their heads. And we look at current news in the news cycle around innovation that's happened in the last 2 weeks so that everyone can have a point of reference to share what they see. And then at the end, they say, I need help with XYZ. And in real time, we match make in the room. And we operate under this very, philanthropic mentality of give first, help each other first, which I have completely stolen from Brad Feld and Techstars and that whole crew, and Cohen, which I'm a big believer in some of that thinking. And so we set that stage on phase 1, which is how do people create that community of curiosity, flex that muscle again, that I'm curious and I'm creative. And if they can do it, why can't I? That changes how people think about themselves little by little. Then we move into modernized workforce training. And this looks at people having a sense of agency over who do they want to become from a professional standpoint, but also personally. And we start addressing money management, self-talk, goal setting, all these soft skills that we've written into a curriculum we call the Great Eight. So it's 8 areas of human flourishing, or eudaimonia. And then we move into also technical skills trainings as we pick a vertical. And that vertical is for that town to start to move their creativity towards serving a specific industry as an R&D lab. So they start to learn skills they need. Some of it's coding, some of it's design, some of it's finance, but it's for them to fulfill the ability to actually create the aspirational things they want to do, because aspirations without a clear pathway create frustration. And that's a big mistake we make. We'll motivate people without giving them the actual cookies on the bottom shelf education. So that workforce training then leads into our startup acceleration. And now people are actually showing off what they're creating and the value and beauty of their creations. It's our job with our community manager to then match make them to the appropriate resource within the community. Often, those communities don't have a resource to help scale the company that's in the knowledge economy. But they do have, if someone's an artist, they can connect them to the art gallery or the SBA. But let's be honest, the SBA, SBDC is not here to serve knowledge economy companies. Well, hard stop. And yet we want to inspire people to play in the knowledge economy game. And where's their access to capital? Where's their mentorship? Where's their joint venture partners, their advisory board coming from? With the guy who owns the grocery store down the street, that's a noose around the neck for anybody who's trying to run a startup in the tech economy that brings on dumb money. And I'm not saying it's, you have dumb money, green money, and smart money. Dumb money being the grocer down the street, potentially, who's expecting return in 6 months on his investment or as an advisor. Not that he's dumb, that's just not the right kind of investor for a knowledge economy company. So we help match make to SBA, art gallery, whatever. But when someone says, hey, I have an idea that's ready to scale, we've also developed a relationship with publicly traded corporations, national laboratories, privately held companies that are, worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And they view us as a platform across the country and now the globe that kind of has the bat phone to the MacGyver innovators, the people who are out in the middle of nowhere coming up with solutions to their industries. And we're turning over rocks that they can't. And so we pick up the phone and match make them from an IP standpoint that builds joint ventures, investment arms, other pieces. And then finally, we build meaningful real estate and placemaking alongside of real estate developers. And we have proven that we can take an old asset that's been abandoned and turn it into a fully occupied facility within 7 days of getting its CO, and it gets a much higher price per square foot. All that's around the idea of grassroots community that starts with storytelling nights.
Exactly. And I think you've got 5 or 6 buildings now, but the goal is to unleash human capital, make them more of who they are. And if it's, as you say, the future of dogs, because they're doing something great in dog grooming, let's create a cluster around it. Let's be who we are, celebrate it, and build an economy around it. And I think it's a brilliant process. Clay, that does not sound dissimilar to the way you look at the world from where you are, except you're dealing with a much bigger community. 2 questions. You've done this process where you are. When you go to a Silicon Harlem event, you can feel the enthusiasm in the room. What I always took away from it when I talked to the young people up there was, we can stay here now. We can stay home. We don't have to go someplace else because, our home now is becoming a place where we can do business. But based on what you said before, as we've been hit with these, this social calamity, does it erode the confidence for a process like the one that Silicon Harlem has been practicing?
A crisis, a pandemic, all of these things should not only illuminate so many things, but should inspire. In some ways, this is the era of innovation. This is an era of correction, exploration. The best songs came out of tragedy, right? Whether it was in the 60s or before. The best poems, the best plays, the best everything comes out of disaster. Even 9/11 was a catalyst to the innovation of what we're experiencing now between the Ubers and the everything else. So I think that that's a very important. I did want to quickly touch back on both of my colleagues here, Professor Horwitch, who really talked about his son and Taiwan. And I just want to make a real quick comment about that. I studied this very well too, all over the world, and since the pandemic and a little bit before. And Taiwan would, I guess Professor Horwitz is what, 80 miles from China, and China being the epicenter. Well, what Taiwan did was they learned from SARS. They actually built a plan from the SARS pandemic, and nothing happened the year after they built it, or the year after that, or the year after that, to the point where they're almost saying, why did we spend all this money putting together a plan for a disaster when nothing's happening? So when the pandemic came, they go, oh, let's dust this thing off. And right, 50, 60,000 in China and 7 in Taiwan. So you're talking about not only sort of the technology side of this, but just plain old common sense of having a plan. And I think we, as a very developed country, have been very irresponsible from that perspective. And I'm hoping that one of the things that we're able to do moving forward, Lou, is to really be prepared. That's where the intelligence comes in, the ICF and everything that you've been preaching for so long. And speaking of preaching, to your question, one of the things Silicon Harlem has done is both. We both give people fish and we teach people how to fish. We do both because there's an emergency where kids in our class right now, I talked a story about the kids who had no electricity. Well, half the kids that are joining us right now in our curriculum don't have a computer. They've been trying to code on a cell phone. It's impossible. So we have to give them computers, but we also are teaching them. We're showing them and teaching them and moving them further along so that they can do their own fishing. So I say all that to say, again, there's some fundamentals before we can get to all of this innovation that we're talking about. There's some fundamental things we have to do as a community and as a society that will help move that forward in terms of people being able to move themselves. If you look at Harlem, just some statistics around Harlem that I think would be interesting for everyone if you don't know. Even if you live in New York City, you might not know. There's 14 colleges in Harlem. 14 colleges, Harlem. Arguably, 2 of them are Ivy Leagues. We have a pipeline right here in Harlem. It's the most accessible part of New York City. It has more bridges coming into it than any other part of the city, and most of them are free. Now, that's a problem because if you look at social determinists, Lou, you're looking at people entering Manhattan through Harlem with their cars, blowing all that amount of particulates into our environment, and our kids have the highest propensity of asthma. This is not rocket science as to why things are happening the way they are happening, but I will end with this particular point. I do not like the word smart, not in the context of a community, not in the context of technology. It is absolutely not my thing. I don't believe that that is a great terminology. It's a word, certainly, but I think you can't come up to Harlem and say, hey, we're going to make you smart. It doesn't work. What we are talking about is nothing new. Nothing new, nothing new. All we're doing is, as Nick said, we are only moving forward. And what that means is we are looking at a tech-enabled infrastructure moving forward. Tech-enabled. Everything becomes animate. Everything becomes much more efficient, which is the goal, is efficiency, which has always been the goal of America. America was built on the idea of making a better life for ourselves. And as a result, it has progressed. In Harlem, when I first moved to Harlem, yellow cabs would not come to Harlem. They were scared. So we would have a system in Harlem where you called a gypsy cab. They were in front of your building within a minute, and they took you wherever you wanted to go. We had Uber before Uber. All Uber did was put an app to it. You can talk about Airbnb, where Black people couldn't stay in hotels back in the day and would have to call out somewhere where they were headed to find a place to stay. We had Airbnb before Airbnb. None of this is new. All it is a progression, which it should be. We will soon be flying in short distances. At one point, we used to walk, right? So all I'm saying is we have to demystify the technology and become much more focused on humanity, and the two will come together under the greatness of innovation, which should be a progression. It's just a progression, and what we need to do, to Professor's point, is why are we leaving our minds and our brains on the sideline?
Yeah.
You know, those kids in some of these tough areas are brilliant, but they just, so this is how I sum it up, and Lou has heard me say this many a time. This has never been an issue of intelligence. I'm sorry. No one on earth has the center of intelligence. Intelligence is distributed everywhere evenly, but access and exposure is not. There's nothing else anybody on this listening to us. I hope you remember that. Intelligence is distributed everywhere evenly, but access and exposure is not. And I would add on that, from the beginning of time.
Yeah. Since
from the beginning of time. Even
since they made the 2 pounds.
In the throes of slavery, you can read the diaries of many of slave owners on talking about how smart many of their slaves being able to build irrigation and build these things because people are curious. Anyway, Lou, I don't want to get too far off, but I'm just saying, let's get away from this idea of thinking you're going to make people smart and understand that we want to get people involved to create a tech-enabled community, making it more efficient, bringing more parity to zip codes so that where you live doesn't determine where you come out. And we should now have things like, oh, gee, maybe we can solve cancer. Oh, maybe we can solve Alzheimer's. Maybe we can solve diabetes. These things can be done. Look at the coronavirus. If you throw $1 trillion at it, it will have a vaccine, all right? If you remember when it started out, oh, the vaccine is going to be years and years away. Well, you throw $1 trillion at it, and all of a sudden you got it. So these things.
May I ask a question for kind of clarity or maybe a discussion point I'm curious about?
Please.
Yeah, yeah.
You were saying about kind of reducing friction in communities and creating more robust tech-enabled infrastructure, which I don't disagree. To give some framework, like, you know, we work with North Las Vegas, we work with Utica, we've done activations on First Nations lands with, you know, the land-grant universities and Apple, along with some folks from the Obama administration. So I understand infrastructure where, you know, people have no broadband, right? Like we're trying to figure out how to get hotspots in cars, and so that people can like suck internet off a vehicle that's parked in a neighborhood, right? However, I think human capital and dormant human capital and overlooked human capital is the first order principal problem, not the infrastructure. At one point I spoke on a panel and a professor wouldn't join me because the topic of my speech was useless cities with useless people. And he kind of looked at that like, shame on you. And my argument was, we have our current system where we're subsidizing cities, where we're subsidizing the food, their infrastructure, faster internet, and yet we leave the human capital to sit and rot. And so it watches YouTube and fills up Wikipedia for us. That's shame on us for a really crappy model of human infrastructure paired with social services. And then the other model argued was, so that's one where we're currently at. Then there's the other one where, you know, we stop all the subsidies and see survival of the fittest, who makes it out of there, who survives, who rises up in the struggle. Or there's option 3, which is how do we unify and maybe prioritize activation of the human capital to authentically decide what does that community want to specialize in being an engine of creativity and innovation and confidence and nonsense around, And how do we pair that human capital knowledge, the nonsense, the creativity with an industry that needs research and development done for it? And how do we harmonize their corporate social responsibility dollars and their corporate development dollars in a meaningful way, so that corporations are no longer paying for their sins of capitalism, but that they are actually investing in a give-take relationship that's meaningful for humans to feel as though we're contributing.
Yeah, Nick, let me stop you right there, because you've asked that question. That is the key question, and I'm going to turn it over to Mel, because
okay, please.
And it's a great question, because he's been writing about that and thinking about that for years, and that's what you do, Mel. How do you answer, Nick, and of course Clay?
Which one's first was my question, right? Infrastructure or human capital?
The social innovation gets introduced to create human capital, right? I don't think we argue that. The question is, how do we introduce it? Have I got that right, Mel?
Yeah. Well, are you talking to me, Lou?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a series of great questions and issues that have come up, and I want to make just a couple small examples, offer a couple small examples. The first one is, as Clay mentioned, Taiwan has been very successful, and they've learned from SARS. A key difference between, and they're both, in Taiwan and China are both Chinese. A key difference is Taiwan is a democracy. And there's a very important issue here in a community. Do you need to be some kind of democracy? I mean, you can have all the technology. You can make Shenzhen, China, a so-called smart city. Then people say it's being used not just for traffic or to fight crime, but for security. But what happens when you use the technology, but it's in the context of a democracy, where ultimately, supposedly, people decide. They can vote new people in, take other people out. There's an element of what we said before, trust. Using, and this is true in Korea too, South Korea as well. And I personally think you need some requisite amount of democracy. What is called open society, because I was involved in a Soros institution where open, and I think this is an issue worth exploring when we talk about where to go in the future. Do you need a democracy? Do you need some sort of sense by people that indeed the people in charge are on their side, that there's an element of trust? I think this is certainly true in Taiwan. It's certainly true in Korea. Probably true in Singapore and places like that. Is that true in the United States now? Is that true? It's certainly, and one wonders about even pouring technology to solve a problem may not solve a problem if you don't have some requisite amount of the people knowing that somehow they can make their voices heard.
That's a great point, Mel.
Just keep in mind,
Clay,
keep in mind Cuba though. Cuba has one of the lowest rates of deaths also, and is not a democracy.
It's a very good point, and we can't be rigid in this because there are exceptions or there are differences. But I think this is worth exploring. I want to make just another point,
please,
and that is learning, learning is extremely important. And communities and societies that are capable of learning, that is, they have a memory of it, they maintain this, and they learn the lessons. So they can go from SARS to COVID, right? This is what Korea did, this is what Taiwan did, and I guess this is what Hong Kong sort of did.
Estonia as well. Yeah.
And Estonia as well. So learning becomes an important part of this whole recipe, right? Are we in this country going to learn? We did not learn from Ebola, I guess, even though we played a key role in Ebola, right? We were the leaders in Ebola, according to what I've heard. But somehow we did not learn sufficiently to apply it to the crisis we have today. So I think learning is extremely important here. And also this issue of technology that was raised. As I said, I was in Lagos, Nigeria 6 months ago or so, and you go to Lagos and it is, talk about a city without infrastructure. Here you have a city of what, 20, 25 million people. There's no metro, right? Let alone, you know, enough highways. And when it rains, these neighborhoods are flooded. Yet Lagos is a hub of entrepreneurship. There's a district called Yaba that's kind of the Silicon Valley of Africa, or one of them. Lagos, it's in Lagos that they started Nollywood, just with handheld cameras, that became the second largest film industry in the world, right? Very successful. So human talent becomes extremely important here. And somehow giving people a chance to use this talent to create things. Now, it's insufficient in a place like Nigeria, but at least you see the beginnings of it. There's a craving for education. There's a craving for education.
And of course that
cultivate this.
Yeah,
So
go ahead, Mel. Want to finish that?
I want to, and I'll just sort of end this by saying that learning, and I think there needs to be an ability by the leadership to think what I would call strategically, not just to kind of deal with what's in front of our nose, but to say, whether you're in Harlem or in Budapest or wherever you are, you know, where do we want to be in 10 years, right? What do we need to do to put in place where we want to be? And to think, and this requires leadership. And then I think, just a couple points I'll make and then I'll stop. I think there needs the ability to have the ability to excite people, you know, whether it's being entrepreneurial, whether it's to deal with social innovation, whether it's to do something about the neighborhood, just to excite people for hope. Innovation is important because it's uplifting. It means there's a future for you or your children, right? Without innovation, it's sort of a fix. And finally, what I've seen in these places that flip, that work, if you want to be optimistic, there's respect for the people in the community, respect for their potential or talent. And somehow that has to be articulated and shown. So.
Very good, Mel. And so what I want to do, Clay and Nick, you know, in about the 5 minutes we have left, is bring that down to the community level, right? The common denominator. I mean, you know, we could argue that democracy is also wobbly and probably has been for a long time, but it is a common denominator that expresses at its core the idea of an equal society. And it's an aspiration, but everybody can embrace it and have an interpretation for it. Clay and then Nick, how do you establish a common denominator in a community now? Because as you know, when we go to intelligent communities that are really functioning well, like Taoyuan in Taiwan and Tallinn, Estonia, there is a common ethos. There is a belief that everybody should be putting together social determinants that will make everybody better long-term. That is a common denominator. Where do we go now in a community to establish common denominators, and can innovation be used? Clay, I'll start with you.
Well, again, thank you for having me on. I know we're starting to wrap up here, so I'll try to be quick to a very deep question. Right? So there's, you set us up that we could go for another hour on that, but I will say this.
Well, we'll bring you back.
Nick has brought up human capital, and I'm really thinking a lot about that because I struggle with that. I struggle with the term. I'm trying to struggle with the definition. I'm trying to measure that. I'm trying to figure out what that means. So I'm happy you brought that up, Nick. I really want to figure that out in my own world. One thing I do realize, though, Lou, to your question, is that the community is going to be successful and will continue to be successful based on being able to take control of a lot of the social determinants that have been sort of negatively impacted these neighborhoods for hundreds of years. This was not accidental. This was by design why certain communities have had the struggles that they have. It's been by design. And again, back to human capital, when I saw Floyd be killed on the street with a knee in his neck, I wonder what kind of human capital that it was sort of calculated around that. I had a very good upbringing, great parents. My father being a military man, so living on bases, and it just seemed so democratized and equal. And when my father retired and I got into the regular world, I saw these like real differences. People being very super rich, and some people poor, and some people didn't have a parent in the home. And I just thought, wow, how could this really be, you know? And when I remember being in my first year in college, and a police officer pulled me over. I had no idea why or what. It was just, and he never gave me a ticket. He just messing around with me. My son, you know, now in college, got pulled over walking back to school. There's something weird here that is underlying just the nature of America that has made it very difficult for some of us, and we can't really sort of think about all the greatness that's to come if we don't start fixing some of that. So I think we have a great moment in time to do it right now. I really do. It's whether it's through storytelling, whether it's through, you know, figuring out how to all, you know, come together and work and all this other stuff. But this is a great moment in time. My prism, and I'll finish with this, my prism is in fact broadband. I'm sorry, I know that some of you may not agree, but I think the leveling tool right now in this country is to make sure everyone has a connection in their home. It should be free. It should be a human right, because anything you say to me, I automatically think, oh, there's some people that are not going to be able to get that because they're not online. So when you say, oh, let's do this, and it's going to require something like an email or a website or some sort of connectivity, you just X'd out a bunch of people. So I think at the core of what we do, if you look at Maslow's laws, if you look at the Maslow pyramid, I've added a layer to that, which is broadband. That has to be part of the essential in life because it's directly tied to social determinants. So that's the way I look at it.
That's your common denominator. And of course, that's been our first criteria among our 6 for over 20 years, and we're still not there. So that is a critical common denominator. Nick, the last word to you on this, just to move it over, because sure. Both Mel and Clay talked about learning and codifying systems that are healthy, whether they're technology systems or whether they're human learning systems, and then moving forward with them. Yeah, we had plans to deal with pandemics, even in this country. We evidently threw it out the window this time. That's a whole other issue. But you talk about codifying systems that evolve into 2 words that I love, joyful clusters. And they can be, if I understand what the Innovation Collective is all about, joyful clusters of human beings expressing themselves fully in all of their dignity for economic consequence and social consequence. Is that a common denominator worth pursuing next with our tools for innovation?
Yes. I think at the end of the day, people want more money and to be happier. And these joyful clusters, I think to accommodate that, the only reason why they want more money is because we've decided how to keep score that way as a globe. Happiness and that joy that they want is a human condition we're all stuck with by evolution or design, however you want to say that. But I do think that should be the true north for a community to say, look, how do we decide how to make more money and be happier? But to understand the rules of the game is key. Because when someone just says, I want to be the next Silicon Valley, you can't be, period. When someone says, I want to be, a great port, there's already a couple great ports. Sure, maybe you could play in that game, but it's a different game now. And there are ways to win, but the starting point that I think every community needs to understand is quit sitting around with a bunch of people trying to write out how they think the plan looks. Figure out what you want to do and start. This is not footloose. If you want to dance, you can dance. So start building a meaningful community of people who are focused on gathering to accomplish a goal and throw the spaghetti at the wall. Start experimenting. There are key best practices that we've discovered over our 7 years of experimentation in 80 plus communities and around the world, in China and Canada and foreign, island nations. But forget the best practices. just get back to your human nature. How are we happier? How do we start making more money? And how do we take care of each other? Because that sets a goal that's a struggle. I think too many people wait for governments to give them the playbook. They wait for the experts to come in and give them the playbook, and they forget that any great thing started with the coalition of the willing, just doing it. So get started. That's the answer to where you start.
And we all have the capability for joy within us. We need the society and the social determinants, and as Professor Horwitz said, the learning tools to get there. I think it's a great way to end it, Nick. I'm always reminded that in the middle of the Great Depression, we came up with the idea of Social Security, and security was the key word there. And it was interesting. I finished Andrew Yang's book the day the government decided to give people income. Well, it's a pretty good idea looking back now. The universal basic income. We triggered those ideas through this calamity. Innovations began to occur and will continue to occur, and you three guys will be leading them. So I thank you all for coming. We're going to bring you back. We have to do this again. We could go on for a long time. So Mel Horwitch, Clayton Banks, Nick Smoot, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you, Lou.
Thank you, Lou.
Great to have you here.
Great.
Take care.
My pleasure. Many
Thank you,
thanks
guys.
also. Take care.
So long, people.
Many thanks also to ICF Canada for their support of this episode. To learn more about them, visit icf-canada.com. Our No Place But Home series is produced as a service to our network of intelligent communities and movement followers around the world. Shout out to our series producer, Matt Owen. Join us next time for the final installment of this series when we talk with Cisco's TJ Costello, who heads Cisco's Smart Cities programs here in North America. To learn more about the ICF method for cities and communities, go to intelligentcommunity.org. And follow us on Twitter at New Communities and Facebook. I'm Lou Zaccarella, evidently losing his voice, reminding you that there really is no place but home. Take care, everyone.